The crystalline chamber of the Zorlaxian High Throne pulsed with a symphony of psychic energy, a living tapestry of color and vibration that most species could never comprehend. Thousands of courtiers stood in perfect geometric formation, their neural tendrils intertwining to create a collective consciousness that hummed with anticipation. King Vextar sat upon the quantum resonance throne, a living construct of biomechanical architecture that responded to his every thought. His psychic aura blazed like a neutron star, brilliant, devastating, absolute. Beside him, the royal advisors trembled, their own psychic signatures dimming in his overwhelming presence. And then there was Lyra. She stood at the center of the chamber, a solitary figure of profound stillness, where the other Zorlaxian royals radiated vibrant, multichromatic psychic energy. Lyra's aura flickered like a dying candle. Weak, pathetic, an aberration in a civilization that measured worth through the intensity of one's psychic projection. Princess Lyra of the 7th Quantum Line. The king's voice thundered, not through sound, but through direct neural transmission that reverberated through every mind in the chamber. You stand accused of the most grievous crime a royal can commit, genetic insufficiency. The words were a death sentence in all but physical execution. Lyra did not move. She had learned long ago that showing emotion was a weakness, and weakness in the Zorlaxian court was fatal. Her eyes, larger and more reflective than human eyes, with irises that shifted like liquid mercury, remained fixed on a point just beyond her father's throne. Your psychic potential measures at 0.03 quantum resonance units, continued Vextar, each word a blade designed to cut deeper than any physical weapon. In our 10,000 cycles of recorded history, no royal has ever manifested such minimal capabilities. You are an evolutionary regression, a genetic mistake that threatens the very foundation of our imperial bloodline. The courtier's collective consciousness rippled with a mixture of disgust, fascination, and barely contained excitement. Political executions were rare and public humiliations even rarer. Vextar raised his hand, and the chamber's quantum field began to shift. Holographic genealogical records materialized, tracing Lyra's lineage, a proud line of psychic warriors and imperial strategists. Each holographic ancestor seemed to stare down at her with disappointment, their vibrant psychic signatures a stark contrast to her own dim aura. Execution would be merciful, the king declared, and mercy is not a luxury you have earned. A collective intake of breath, not physical, but a psychic equivalent that made the chamber's energy fluctuate, swept through the assembled nobles. With a gesture of pure contempt, Vextar summoned a navigation console. His thoughts danced across its quantum interface, plotting a trajectory that would become Lyra's tomb. The holographic display showed a small, insignificant blue planet, Earth, spinning slowly, almost mockingly. "You will be cast to the most primitive world in our galactic database," he pronounced. "A planet of brutal, unconnected mammals who have barely mastered interplanetary communication. No psychic network, no advanced technology, no hope of survival." Lyra's mercury-like eyes flickered. For the first time, something burned within her, not the massive psychic energy her people valued, but something far more dangerous, a spark of defiance. The royal shuttle materialized, its quantum-folded hull gleaming with the royal insignia. Minimal supplies were loaded, just enough to ensure her initial survival, but not enough to provide real hope. It was a calculation designed to prolong her suffering, to ensure a slow, humiliating death on a distant, uncaring world. As the shuttle's quantum drive began to charge, King Vextar delivered his final judgment. "You are no longer my daughter. You are no longer Zorlaxian. You are nothing." The chamber erupted in a psychic wave of finality. Lyra was pushed into the shuttle, her few personal belongings unceremoniously tossed after her. No goodbye, no final compassion, just silence. And then, launch. The shuttle pierced the quantum membrane of Zorlaxian space, its trajectory a perfect parabola of exile. Earth grew larger in its navigation systems, a blue-green marble of potential doom. What the Zorlaxian king did not know was that this moment was not an end. It was a beginning. The Nevada desert was not a welcome sight for any living creature, let alone an alien princess with minimal survival skills. Lyra's shuttle disintegrated around her in a spectacular display of quantum-fold technology failing catastrophically, leaving nothing but scattered debris and a smoking crater in the sun-baked earth. She emerged like a ghost, half-conscious, her alien biology struggling against an environment completely foreign to her genetic programming. The heat was her first true enemy. Zorlaxian physiology had evolved in a climate-controlled, psychically regulated environment. Here, the merciless sun was a predator more ruthless than any she had ever encountered. Lyra's first coherent thought was not survival. It was shame. Even in this moment of absolute vulnerability, the neural imprint of her father's final judgment burned brighter than the desert sun. "You are nothing," echoed in the quantum pathways of her mind, a psychological wound more devastating than any physical injury. She crawled, not with purpose, but with the basic biological imperative that transcends even the most sophisticated consciousness. Each movement was agony. Her skin, a delicate membrane designed for controlled atmospheric environments, began to crack and blister under the relentless solar radiation. The first human she encountered was not a rescue. It was a test. Sarah Martinez didn't see a lost alien princess. She saw a potential threat. The ex-Marine's survival camp was located in the most unforgiving part of the Nevada desert, a training ground where military personnel and survival enthusiasts were pushed beyond human limits. Sarah had spent 15 years transforming soft recruits into hardcore survivors, and her instincts were honed to a razor's edge. When the shuttle's debris field caught her advanced surveillance system, Sarah didn't call for help. She approached with a tactical precision that would have impressed even the most hardened Zorlaxian military strategist. Lyra heard the approach before she saw it, boots cutting through loose desert terrain, the mechanical click of a weapon being prepared, breath controlled with military discipline. "Don't move," Sarah's voice cut through the desert silence like a blade. Lyra understood the command, not through language, but through the universal tone of absolute authority. Her alien neural pathways, so useless in psychic projection, were remarkably adept at threat assessment. Sarah's knife pressed against Lyra's throat before the alien could even comprehend the movement. The blade was cold, professional, calculating. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded. No fear, no hesitation. Lyra's universal translator, barely functioning, produced a response that was more mechanical than linguistic. Lyra, Zorlaxian, exiled. Something in Sarah's eyes changed, not softness, not compassion, but a predatory recognition of potential. "You're going to die out here," Sarah stated. It wasn't a threat. It was a clinical observation. The next few hours became a brutal introduction to human survival. Sarah didn't rescue Lyra. She tested her. Water rationing became a psychological warfare exercise. Basic first aid was transformed into an endurance challenge. Every moment was a calculation. Could this alien survive? Lyra discovered that human survival was not about psychic power. It was about adaptation, resilience, a fundamental will to overcome that her own civilization had never understood. By nightfall, Sarah had made her decision. This alien was not a victim. This alien was a weapon waiting to be forged. "Welcome to survival," Sarah said, tossing Lyra a canteen and a set of military-grade survival gear. "Your training starts now." The underground research facility was Sarah's real kingdom, a labyrinth of cutting-edge technology that would make most military black sites look like children's science projects. Nestled deep beneath the Nevada desert, it was a testament to human ingenuity that existed just beyond the reach of official oversight. Lyra's first encounter with the facility was nothing short of sensory overload. Where Zorlaxian technology relied on psychic projection and quantum entanglement, human technology was a brutal, beautiful mess of mechanical precision and adaptive engineering. Holographic displays danced alongside physical circuit boards. Quantum processors sat next to mechanical switches. It was organized chaos. "Your first lesson," Sarah said, sliding a standard military-grade communication drone across the workbench, "is that technology is not about power. It's about adaptation." The drone looked deceptively simple. To a Zorlaxian, it would have been considered primitive, a basic reconnaissance tool with limited capabilities. But Sarah's eyes gleamed with something Lyra had never seen before: pure potential. Lyra's alien neural pathways began to interface with the drone's systems in ways no human engineer could have predicted. Her fingers, longer and more articulated than human digits, moved with a precision that blurred the line between touch and quantum manipulation. Sarah watched, her tactical mind racing. The alien wasn't just examining the drone. She was rewriting its fundamental operational parameters. Within hours, the simple reconnaissance drone transformed. Its communication range expanded exponentially. Quantum encryption protocols that would have taken human engineers months to develop emerged like living code. The drone's sensors became a multi-dimensional information-gathering network that could penetrate electromagnetic interference like tissue paper. "Interesting," Sarah muttered, her voice a mixture of professional assessment and barely contained excitement. The transformation wasn't just technological. It was a meeting of two entirely different technological paradigms. Zorlaxian quantum science met human practical engineering, and something entirely new emerged. Next came the weapon systems. Sarah brought out a prototype railgun, a weapon that represented the bleeding edge of human military technology. Most engineers would spend years perfecting its design. Lyra approached it like a living organism. Her fingers traced the electromagnetic coils. Neural interfaces that were dormant in human design suddenly came alive. The railgun's theoretical maximum velocity, already impressive by human standards, doubled, then tripled. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Sarah asked, more of a challenge than a question. Lyra's response was clinical. "I am translating potential. Your technology speaks a language of limitations. I am teaching it to speak possibility." The weapons development team, a group of ex-military engineers and cutting-edge researchers, watched in stunned silence. This wasn't just modification. This was technological revolution. A standard communications array became a multi-dimensional information network. The thermal imaging system transformed into a predictive threat detection mechanism that could analyze potential scenarios faster than human cognition. But the most remarkable transformation was happening to Lyra herself. Each technological modification became a lesson in human innovation. The Zorlaxian approach was about psychic control and predetermined potential. Human technology was about breaking boundaries, about finding solutions where none seemingly existed. By the end of the first week, the facility's most advanced systems bore Lyra's unmistakable signature, a hybrid of alien precision and human wild creativity. Sarah stood back, watching the metamorphosis. This was no longer about survival. This was about creating something the universe had never seen before. "Welcome to human engineering," she said, a rare smile crossing her typically stern features. "We don't just build technology. We reimagine what's possible." Lyra looked up, her mercury-like eyes now reflecting something new. Not the dim psychic signature of her past, but the burning potential of a technological revolution waiting to be unleashed. The training ground was not a place of comfort. It was a crucible designed to shatter every preconception Lyra had about strength, survival, and self-worth. Day one began with what Sarah called a baseline assessment. A series of trials that would have broken most species within hours. The desert environment became a living weapon. Temperature fluctuations that would kill a normal organism were just the beginning of Lyra's challenge. In the Zorlaxian court, they measured your worth through psychic projection, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the morning heat like a knife. "Here, worth is measured by what you can endure." The first test was water discipline. Lyra was given exactly 500 milliliters of water for a 12-hour survival scenario in 45 degrees Celsius heat. Zorlaxian physiology had always relied on internal regulatory systems and psychic energy conservation. Human survival was about something far more primal, pure, unyielding will. By hour 6, Lyra's alien biology began to break down. Her skin, designed for controlled environments, started to crack. Her internal temperature regulation system fought a losing battle against the merciless desert. But she did not ask for mercy. Sarah watched, her tactical eye measuring every micro-reaction. This wasn't just physical training. This was psychological reprogramming. The next challenge was sensory deprivation, a sealed chamber where sound, light, and temperature became weapons of psychological warfare. Zorlaxians relied on collective consciousness, on constant psychic interconnection. Here, Lyra was utterly alone. Hours passed, or was it days? Time became a fluid concept. In that darkness, Lyra confronted the echoes of her past. Her father's voice, the court's dismissal, the constant reminder of her perceived weakness. But something was changing. Each moment of isolation was not breaking her. It was stripping away the layers of her old identity. Close quarters combat training followed. Sarah didn't teach traditional martial arts. She taught survival, a brutal, efficient method of fighting that recognized no rules beyond survival itself. Your people measure combat through psychic projection, Sarah explained, demonstrating a move that could disable an opponent in less than a second. Humans fight with everything they have: mind, body, spirit. There is no separation. Lyra learned to fight not with the delicate psychic projections of her people, but with a raw, visceral energy that was entirely new. Each strike was a reclamation. Each defensive move a statement of existence. The psychological tests were even more intense. Scenario-based training that pushed the boundaries of decision-making. Survival situations that required instantaneous choices between impossible options. Lyra discovered that human potential wasn't about predetermined abilities. It was about adaptation. One particular exercise haunted her, a simulation where she had to choose between saving a group of strangers or completing a critical mission. Zorlaxian protocol would have prioritized mission success. Sarah's training revealed a more complex moral landscape. Strength isn't about power, Sarah would repeat. It's about choice, about understanding that every life has value. By the end of the first month, Lyra was no longer the princess who had crashed in the desert. She was becoming something else entirely, a hybrid of alien potential and human determination. Her mercury-like eyes, once dim and defeated, now burned with an inner fire that would have terrified her former court. She had learned the most important lesson, that weakness is not a state of being, but a choice. As the sun set on another brutal training day, Sarah approached her. No congratulations, no softness, just a simple observation. "You're beginning to understand," she said. Lyra's response was immediate. "I am not who I was," she replied. "I am becoming something they never imagined possible." The Zorlaxian scout ship dropped out of quantum space like a predator, its quantum fold hull gleaming with royal insignia. Standard reconnaissance protocol. Find the exiled princess. Confirm her demise. Return with proof. They never anticipated what waited below. Deep in the Nevada facility, Sarah's early warning systems came alive milliseconds before traditional detection methods would have registered anything. Quantum entanglement sensors, modified by Lyra's hybrid technology, painted a holographic representation of the incoming threat with terrifying precision. "Incoming," Sarah's voice was calm, clinical. "Your family sends a welcoming committee." Lyra's response was immediate. No fear, no hesitation. Just cold, calculated preparation. The hybrid technologies they had developed over months of intense training now hummed with potential. What appeared to be a standard communication array transformed into a multi-dimensional interference network. Quantum encrypted signals began to dance around the incoming ship, creating a technological noise that would confuse even the most advanced Zorlaxian tracking systems. "They expect a victim," Lyra said, her mercury eyes reflecting tactical holographic displays. "They will find a weapon." The scout ship's initial scan revealed nothing unusual, just a barren stretch of desert, minimal technological signatures. Standard protocol dictated a close-range reconnaissance, a fatal mistake. As the ship descended, Lyra activated the first layer of defense. Quantum-modulated electromagnetic pulses, a technology that blended Zorlaxian quantum science with human adaptive engineering, began to destabilize the ship's quantum-fold propulsion system. The Zorlaxian crew's first indication of trouble came when their primary navigation systems began to fluctuate. Quantum entanglement broke down. Backup systems failed in cascading sequences that defied their understanding of technological failure. "Impossible," the ship's commander muttered, his psychic projection flickering with confusion. Lyra's voice, transmitted directly through their communication systems, was their first true moment of terror. "You sent me here to die," she said, each word a precise tactical transmission. "You were wrong." The ship's defensive systems attempted to activate. Quantum shields began to form, but Lyra had already rewritten their fundamental operational parameters. What should have been a defensive mechanism became a progressive system failure. Sarah watched from the facility's command center, a rare smile crossing her typically stern features. This was not just a defense. This was a total technological deconstruction. The scout ship began to break apart not through physical weapons, but through a systematic destruction of its own technological foundations. Quantum fold drives collapsed. Communication networks imploded. Defensive systems turned against themselves in a ballet of technological self-destruction. But Lyra wasn't finished. As the ship began its catastrophic descent, she broadcast the entire encounter on all Zorlaxian communication frequencies, not just the destruction, but a message. "I am not who you believe me to be." Her transmission cut through their networks. "I am something you cannot comprehend." The ship crashed in a spectacular display of quantum energy and mechanical failure. No survivors, no physical evidence of direct attack, just total, complete destruction that defied every known law of technological warfare. Sarah approached Lyra as the holographic displays began to clear. "Impressive," she said, not a compliment, an assessment. Lyra's response was cold, calculating. "This is only the beginning." Outside, the Nevada desert wind carried the last remnants of quantum energy, a silent witness to a war that had just begun. The communication hub was a masterpiece of hybrid technology, part Zorlaxian quantum network, part human adaptive engineering. Lyra stood at its center, her fingers dancing across quantum-encrypted interfaces that would have been impossible mere months ago. Sarah watched from the command center, her tactical mind analyzing every transmission, every strategic move. This was not just a rebellion. This was a systematic deconstruction of an entire galactic power structure. Lyra's first targets were the marginalized species within the Zorlaxian dominion, those crushed beneath the weight of imperial psychic hierarchy. She didn't send messages. She sent revelations. Encrypted data packets began to flood alternative communication networks. Each transmission was a weapon more devastating than any physical assault. Detailed records of Zorlaxian genetic suppression, classified reports of planetary subjugation, quantum-level proof of systemic oppression that went beyond mere political control. The quantum resonance archives, previously considered unbreachable, began to unravel. Lyra didn't just hack the system. She rewrote its fundamental operational parameters. Information is the most powerful weapon. Sarah had taught her, not just knowledge, but the ability to make that knowledge impossible to ignore. On the planet Krelltax, a species genetically modified to be perpetual laborers received the first transmission. Their neural networks, long suppressed, began to resonate with a frequency of rebellion. Generations of genetic conditioning started to crack. Another transmission reached the mining colonies of the Orion Spiral, slaves to a system that had forgotten their humanity, or whatever passed for humanity in their diverse galactic context, suddenly understood the depth of their oppression. Lyra's broadcasts were more than information. They were a quantum-encrypted call to uprising. Each transmission was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. She didn't just provide data. She provided context, understanding, a narrative that transformed raw information into a weapon of mass awakening. The Zorlaxian communication networks began to destabilize, not through direct attack, but through a systematic deconstruction of their fundamental belief systems. Their quantum communication web, once considered the most secure in the galaxy, became a conduit of their own destruction. Sarah monitored the global response. "You're not just fighting a war," she observed. "You're rewriting the fundamental language of galactic power." Lyra's response was calculated. "Power is a narrative, and I'm changing the story." Diplomatic channels began to fragment. Species that had been isolated began to find each other. Communication networks that were once tools of control became highways of rebellion. The most devastating weapon was not technological. It was psychological. Lyra exposed the fundamental lie of the Zorlaxian dominion, that psychic power was the only measure of worth. She demonstrated that true power came from adaptation, from the ability to transform, to grow. Within weeks, 3 planetary systems began open rebellion. Within months, the galactic communication networks were fundamentally altered. The Zorlaxian king would receive the first true message of rebellion not through a military transmission, but through a quantum-encrypted broadcast that would penetrate every level of their communication infrastructure. "You cast me out," Lyra's message would read. "I am returning, not as a princess, not as a weapon, but as a revolution." Sarah watched the communication matrices shift. Something fundamental was changing in the galaxy. "Welcome to human-inspired warfare," she muttered. "We don't just fight battles. We transform entire civilizations." The Zorlaxian quantum throne world shimmered with an aura of absolute power, a planet-wide citadel that had stood unconquered for 10,000 generations. Its crystal spires rose like psychic daggers against the cosmic backdrop, a testament to imperial might that had crushed countless civilizations. King Vextar did not know fear. Until now. The first signs of collapse came not with explosions or military assaults, but with a complete breakdown of their quantum communication networks. Entire planetary systems began to go dark, not through destruction, but through a systematic deconstruction of their fundamental communication infrastructure. Lyra's approach was not a military invasion, it was a total systemic collapse. The quantum communication arrays that had been the backbone of Zorlaxian imperial power began to unravel. Each transmission carried not just information, but a fundamental reimagining of their entire societal structure. Species once considered subquantum were revealing technologies, historical records, and strategic capabilities that the Zorlaxian Empire had systematically suppressed. When Lyra's first direct transmission reached the quantum throne world, it came not as a threat, but as a precise, calculated dismantling of everything the Empire believed about power. "Father," her message cut through their most secure quantum channels, "you believed weakness was genetic. You were wrong." The transmission included everything. Detailed records of Zorlaxian genetic manipulation, suppressed histories of conquered civilizations, quantum-level proofs of systemic oppression that went beyond mere political control. King Vextar watched as the foundations of his empire began to crumble not through external force, but through the most devastating weapon possible: truth. Sarah's voice came through Lyra's communication interface. "Remember, this isn't just a confrontation. This is a total system reboot." The physical approach was equally calculated. Lyra's modified scout ships, hybrid technologies that blended Zorlaxian quantum science with human adaptive engineering, began to systematically disable critical imperial infrastructure. Not through destruction, but through a complete reprogramming of their fundamental operational parameters. Planetary defense systems turned against themselves. Quantum fold drives became inoperable. Communication networks transformed into conduits of rebellion. When Lyra finally stood before her father, she was not the broken princess he had cast out. She was something entirely new. Her psychic signature, once a dim flicker, now blazed with an energy that defied everything the Zorlaxians understood about power. Not the controlled, hierarchical psychic projection of her people, but a wild, adaptive energy that was fundamentally human in its unpredictability. "You define me by my weakness," Lyra stated, her voice cutting through the quantum throne room like a blade. "I have redefined weakness itself." The confrontation was not a battle. It was a total systemic deconstruction. King Vextar attempted to marshal his psychic defenses, the same abilities that had crushed countless civilizations. But Lyra had already rewritten the fundamental language of psychic warfare. Each of his attacks was absorbed, transformed, turned back upon the imperial structure. Sarah's final instruction echoed in her mind. Power is not about what you can destroy. It's about what you can create. As the quantum throne world began to fragment, Lyra was not just defeating her father. She was dismantling an entire system of oppression. "You cast me out," she said, her final transmission cutting through the dying imperial networks. "I am returning, not as a princess, not as a weapon, but as a revolution." The Zorlaxian Empire did not fall. It was transformed. 5 cycles after the fall of the Zorlaxian Dominion, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The Quantum Concordance, Lyra's new governance model, was not an empire. It was an ecosystem of civilizations, each finding its own path to potential. Sarah stood beside her, no longer just a mentor, but a strategic architect of a new galactic paradigm. Their first summit was held on a neutral planet, a world chosen for its complete lack of historical significance. Representatives from over 300 previously suppressed civilizations gathered, each bearing the marks of their past oppression, each radiating a newfound hope. Lyra's opening address was not a speech. It was a quantum transmission that simultaneously translated across every known communication spectrum. "Potential is not inherited," she began. "It is discovered." The fundamental principles of the quantum concordance were revolutionary. No species would be judged by predetermined genetic markers. No civilization would be limited by its historical circumstances. Each would be given the resources to discover its own path. Sarah's influence was evident in the practical implementation. Where the Zorlaxian system had been about psychic control, the new model emphasized adaptive capabilities, technology transfer programs, open-source scientific exchanges, diplomatic frameworks that prioritized mutual growth over hierarchical dominance. The most radical transformation happened in education and developmental protocols. Every young being would be exposed to multiple evolutionary pathways. Those once considered weak or insufficient would be given the most comprehensive support systems. The very concept of genetic worth was dismantled, replaced by a philosophy of potential. Lyra's own journey became the foundational narrative. Her transformation from a cast-out princess to a galactic revolutionary was studied, analyzed, celebrated, not as a heroic myth, but as a practical model of adaptation. The technological advances came rapidly. Hybrid research centers emerged on hundreds of worlds. Species that had been isolated for millennia began sharing knowledge. The quantum communication networks, once tools of oppression, became highways of collective innovation. Sarah watched the transformation with a tactical eye. This was not just political change. This was a fundamental reimagining of civilization itself. "We're not just rebuilding," she told Lyra during one of their strategic planning sessions. "We're creating a template for what's possible." The most surprising development came from the most unexpected sources. Species once considered technologically primitive began developing breakthrough technologies. The suppression of potential had been holding back entire civilizations. On the anniversary of the Zorlaxian Dominion's fall, Lyra returned to the desert where her transformation began. The Nevada facility, now a galactic historical site, stood as a monument to human-inspired revolution. Her father's final judgment echoed in her memory. "You are nothing." She had become everything. The quantum communication array beside her hummed with transmissions from across the galaxy. Civilizations sharing, growing, expanding. A living network of potential. Sarah approached, her movements still carrying the precision of her military training. Thinking about the past, she asked. Lyra's response was a quantum transmission that carried more meaning than words could express. A complex matrix of possibility, of potential, of hope. The future, she said, is not something that happens to you. It's something you create. The desert wind carried the transmission, a silent witness to a revolution that had rewritten the fundamental understanding of power, potential, and possibility.